Shadow the Hedgehog. His own game opens by calling Sonic the world's fastest hedgehog, and Shadow someone who rivals Sonic. That single word, rivals, is doing a tremendous amount of work. It could mean equal. It could mean Sonic still holds the edge. The game never resolves which, and that ambiguity is doing something deliberate. Because Shadow has physical reasons to be every bit as fast as Sonic, if not faster, he wears air shoes, which means he's gliding through the air without fighting ground friction. Sonic, every single stride, is fighting two forms of resistance simultaneously, the drag between his feet and whatever surface he's running on, and the wind resistance of the air mass moving past him at high velocity. On paper, Shadow has the cleaner biomechanical setup, and that's not just character bioflavor language, it's a description of how his speed mechanically works. And yet Shadow and Sonic have never officially raced against each other, not once. Not in Shadow the Hedgehog, not in a sequel, not across the dozens of mainline games where both characters appear as playable roster members. Every scenario where they share the screen, combat stages, race against time missions, cooperative objectives, is structured around something other than a straight sprint with a clear finish line. The conditions that would actually resolve the speed question have never been assembled in any canonical game. Up through the 2005 era, that evasion matters more than the game lets on. Speed had stopped being Sonic's defining trait by then. The whole main cast could match him in cutscenes and gameplay alike, which made his speed feel less like a unique identity and more like a baseline the cast shared. Shadow's game was already describing a world where Sonic had company at the top of the speed hierarchy. His rival status didn't place him alone against Sonic in some exclusive tier. It placed him within a group that had already partially dissolved Sonic's speed as a distinguishing feature. The game uses the word rivals as though it means something special between two characters, when mechanically the cast around them has already made that relationship less singular than the phrasing implies. The harder you push on this, the more deliberate the evasion looks. An actual race, with a finish line, a timer, a clear winner, would close the question the description deliberately keeps open. And closing that question would disappoint whichever half of the audience found out their character wasn't the fastest. The rival framing keeps both characters commercially viable, keeps both fan bases emotionally invested, and avoids the one outcome that generates guaranteed dissatisfaction. Shadow's game gives you every reason to believe they're equal or near equal. The airskate physics advantage, the explicit rivals language, the matching gameplay speed, and then never gives you the proof either way. What you'd repeat to someone tomorrow, Shadow is positioned as Sonic's equal in his own game, and the airskate hardware gives him a genuine biomechanical advantage over Sonic's simultaneous fight against ground friction and air drag, but the games have never actually tested that claim with an official race, leaving the comparison genuinely unresolvable from the canon alone. Infinite the Jackal. Where Shadow at least claimed to match Sonic's speed through his own physical hardware, Infinite doesn't even compete on that axis. He is one of the major villains in Sonic Forces, and his power doesn't come from velocity. It comes from the Phantom Ruby, a gem embedded in his chest that grants him the ability to bend reality itself. That distinction reframes the entire comparison. We're no longer talking about who reaches the finish line first. We're talking about whether the finish line even exists until Infinite decides it does. The Phantom Ruby lets Infinite create virtual projections of past villains. Chaos and Zavok appear as manifestations of his power during confrontations, which means he can flood a battlefield with threats that aren't physically real, but are fully capable of harming you. He appears in only 3 boss fights across the entire game, a number that seems almost thin for a villain positioned as Forces' central threat, and that scarcity is doing something specific to how his power reads on screen. Sonic defeats Infinite without the Chaos Emeralds thrashing him in direct combat, and the player's custom avatar character can do the same. Both victories are clean, neither requires transformation states, neither leans on external power sources. And yet during their first major confrontation, Infinite had the upper hand. Here's the detail that changes how you read everything else. He had the upper hand specifically because he was wielding a Phantom Ruby prototype. Not the finalized version. The prototype gave him an edge the full completed gem never quite replicated in their later fights. Sonic's clean victories over Infinite came after that prototype advantage had been removed from the equation. Eggman didn't build Infinite from scratch, he recruited him. Infinite was the former leader of the Jackal squad, a military unit that had already been dismantled, and Eggman gave him both the mask he wears and the Phantom Ruby that powers his reality warping. That detail matters enormously. Infinite arrived at Eggman's door already trained, already a commander, already someone who'd led a squad into failure and come out the other side looking for a new purpose. The Phantom Ruby, the mask, the entire threat package. Eggman supplied the hardware. Infinite supplied the tactical mind and the personal vendetta against Sonic that made the combination dangerous. This wasn't a creation story, it was a recruitment story, and the difference is that Infinite came with a history before Eggman ever touched him. The Phantom Ruby is the specific mechanism that lets Infinite surpass Sonic's speed outright. It lets him create virtual projections of past villains like Chaos and Zavok, flooding a battlefield with threats that exist in a reality he's warping rather than in physical space. And those projections can still hurt you. He appears in only 3 boss fights across the entire game. Sonic defeats him without the Chaos Emeralds, and the Avatar can do the same, yet at their first real meeting, Infinite had the upper hand specifically because he wielded a Phantom Ruby prototype, not the finalized version. That prototype gave him an edge the full gem never replicated. The design logic is clear when you look at what Eggman actually needed. He already had mechs and monsters that could match or exceed Sonic's speed. What he'd never had before was a weapon built to make speed itself irrelevant, and a former military commander with reality warping technology and a grudge against Sonic was exactly the kind of psychological instrument that could do that. Infinite was built to break Sonic's confidence, not to outrun him, and the Phantom Ruby prototype at their first meeting is proof that the design almost worked. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which characters faster than Sonic you think had the most legitimate claim. Let's get back into it. Metal Sonic. Infinite had artificial augmentation backing his claim to rival Sonic's speed, but Metal Sonic doesn't need augmentation. He was built from the blueprint up. Debuting as a menacing robotic doppelganger in Sonic CD, Metal Sonic was designed specifically to mimic Sonic's movements. A mirror held up to the original with machinery doing what organic biology had refined through years of racing. That premise, build a machine that moves exactly like Sonic, should by all logic produce something that runs equally fast, and on paper it does. But the version of Metal Sonic that showed up in Sonic Heroes carrying the Metal Madness and Metal Overlord forms painted a picture of overwhelming mechanical power, the kind of visual spectacle that implies a hedgehog's speed crossed with something far less restrained and far more dangerous. The red spiked shell, the glowing red eye, the aggressive posture, every visual cue says this is a darker, faster, more dangerous Sonic, and the game's cutscenes lean hard into that reading at every opportunity. Here's the catch. Yuji Naka, the co-creator who oversaw Metal Sonic's earliest appearances, stated directly that the robot was designed more for precision and power than for outpacing the organic hedgehog. That one sentence rearranges the entire premise. Metal Sonic's defining visual motif sells the idea of a faster Sonic, but the character's actual design brief was never to beat Sonic in a straight sprint. It was to beat Sonic in a fight. The Metal Madness and Metal Overlord transformations in Sonic Heroes lean into that contradiction visually, layering armor and weapons and scale onto a frame that was never supposed to win on raw velocity alone. Nobody in the production was building a faster Sonic, they were building something that could survive going blow for blow with a precision instrument wrapped in spectacle armor. The Metal Madness form marks Metal Sonic's transformation after absorbing concentrated energy from the Chaos Emeralds, gaining destructive power against Sonic and his allies, and Metal Overlord after that pushed even further into God Machine territory. The visual language of those forms, massive, winged, multi-limbed, glowing with absorbed energy, communicates the kind of power that can reshape a planet, and the cutscenes frame those transformations as something Metal Sonic earned through accumulation rather than something he was built with from the factory floor. The contradiction between designed for precision and power, not speed, and achieved form so visually extreme it looks like speed incarnate is the real structural problem here, and it's the one that matters most for a video about who can actually outrun Sonic. The strongest version of the argument for Metal Sonic as a faster-than-Sonic character stands on its own terms and is worth conceding fully. In Sonic Heroes Story Mode, Metal Sonic in his Overlord form towers over Super Sonic, Shadow, and Silver all at once, absorbing enough energy to reshape reality and requiring a genuine 3-on-1 confrontation just to contain him. Visually and narratively, Metal Sonic achieved something no organic hedgehog has ever matched in a direct confrontation, and the cutscenes don't leave much room for interpretation. This robot won that fight. and the game treats that victory as canonical to the story being told. But the reason that concession doesn't land as a refutation is that the show and the design brief are telling two different stories. Naka's statement isn't a retcon, it's a description of the underlying architecture that the spectacle forms were draped over. Metal Sonic achieves overwhelming strength through transformation and absorption, but his core design focuses on precision and power, not pure velocity. The Metal Overlord form represents escalation through absorption and weaponization, prioritizing overwhelming force over raw speed. What this reveals about the larger Sonic system is worth pausing on. The franchise has spent 3 decades building characters whose threat level is communicated through spectacle, bigger transformations, more Chaos Emeralds, more glowing effects, while the actual mechanical question of who moves faster than Sonic gets answered inconsistently because the characters were designed for different jobs. Metal Sonic was built as a rival, mirroring Sonic's capabilities in combat and speed, serving as a dark reflection rather than a complete superior. The visual language says God Machine. The design brief says Precision Instrument. And the canon answer, as Naka stated it, is that the instrument was never meant to beat the Hedgehog at his own game, just to survive playing it long enough to matter. Solaris. Where Metal Sonic operated on the scale of a single planet and a single race, Solaris operates on the scale of every timeline simultaneously, which is a very different kind of problem to have on your hands. Described in Sonic the Hedgehog 2006 as an ancient evil pursued by Dr. Eggman, Solaris doesn't enter the story as a conqueror or a raider moving from world to world. It enters as a sealed flame, locked inside a princess by the Duke of Soliana after the failed Solaris Project claimed the Duke's own life. That project, commissioned by the King of Soliana a decade before the game's present, was the original sin. The Duke died trying to harness the flames of disaster, and in the aftermath, the flames were sealed inside Princess Elise's soul, where they remained dormant until Dr. Eggman, working from the same project files that killed the Duke, targeted Elise specifically to break that seal and release what had been contained. The chain of cause and effect runs directly from the Duke's death through 10 years of containment to the moment the game opens, and Solaris is the thing at the end of that chain, waiting for the seal to break. The Duke died during the Solaris Project, and 10 years later, Eggman is still working from the same disaster, still trying to unlock the same sealed power, still failing to understand that the seal was put there for a reason. The flames of disaster sealed inside Elise aren't just a battery, they're Solaris in its dormant form, a god waiting for the right trigger. When Eggman finally breaks that seal, Solaris doesn't emerge gradually or locally. It exists at all points of time simultaneously, a transcendental phenomenon that the game describes explicitly as omnipresent across past, present, and future. That single detail changes the entire shape of the conflict in a way no previous Sonic antagonist has managed. You cannot fight a being that is already everywhere at once by attacking it in one place. You have to hit it everywhere at once, which requires appearing in 3 separate time periods simultaneously with the kind of power that can actually matter across temporal boundaries. A god that exists in all time periods at once doesn't have a front to assault or a flank to exploit. It has no single point you can reach because it is already at every point simultaneously. The answer the game arrives at is specific and extraordinary. Defeating Solaris required Super Sonic, Super Shadow, and Super Silver to appear in the past, present, and future at exactly the same moment. 1 Hedgehog per era, 3 super forms synchronized across time. That's not a team-up in the usual sense, where allies concentrate their force in one location. It's a coordinated temporal strike against a consciousness that exists across all time periods at once, and even that combined effort, 3 Super Hedgehogs at their absolute maximum, each carrying the full weight of a super transformation, could not destroy Solaris. They could only incapacitate its consciousness, buy themselves a window, and then travel back to the moment before it fully evolved and eliminate the tiny original flame while it was still small enough to erase. The only way to truly destroy Solaris wasn't to overpower it, it was to prevent it from ever existing in the first place. The skeptical objection writes itself, 3 superforms couldn't kill it, so how is that a victory exactly? And the dismantling fact is right there in the structure. 3 superforms incapacitated its consciousness long enough to close the loop retroactively. The game is explicit about the distinction. Solaris, as the evolved omnipresent god, cannot be destroyed by force. The tiny flame at the origin point, before the Solaris Project ever triggered its full evolution, can be erased, and that's the only opening the timeline provides. You cannot outrun something that is already at the finish line before the race starts, but you can, if you have the power to cross time itself, go back and unannounce the race before the starting gunfires. The narrative stakes of that mechanic are extraordinary. The heroes don't win by being stronger. They win by being early enough and coordinated enough across time to reach a moment that hasn't become a problem yet, and then eliminating the problem at its source. What this reveals about the Sonic 2006 design philosophy is that the game was reaching for a scope and stakes that no previous entry in the series had attempted. A literal god, described as a god, requiring the simultaneous deployment of 3 super forms across 3 time periods just to create the conditions for its own erasure. The human cost of that design ambition sits in the Duke of Soliana's death, which is the event that created the conditions for everything that follows. The seal on Elise, the 10-year countdown, the project files Eggman is still working from, and the god that emerges from all of it. The Duke died trying to control a force that was never controllable, and the game's entire present tense plot is a decade-long aftershock of that single failure. Mephiles the Dark. Mephiles was born during the Solaris Project when experiments on the sun god Solaris split him from the deity, making him the manifestation of Solaris's mind and will. A being of pure darkness who craves nothing but destruction. He first appears as the main antagonist in Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, but he is a primary antagonist in Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, fought twice in the Shadow episode, first in Flame Core and then in Dusty Desert. The question a viewer would reasonably be asking at this point is why a shadow being born from a failed god project belongs in a video about speed. The answer is in his mechanics. Mephiles the Dark can copy people's bodies and abilities by absorbing their shadow, which allows him to take on their appearance. A character who can fold himself through time and phase through physical barriers doesn't need to be faster than Sonic in a straight sprint. He can just be wherever Sonic is going before Sonic gets there, not by running faster, but by bypassing the distance entirely. That's not speed in the conventional sense of covering ground more quickly, but it produces the same practical outcome. Mephiles is unreachable by normal means, and that unreachability is functionally identical to being faster than anything that can chase him, because a pursuer cannot catch a target that doesn't move through space in the conventional way. The strongest argument for counting Mephiles as faster than Sonic rests on what his time travel actually lets him do. He doesn't need a Chaos Emerald, a transformation sequence, or an external power source to fold through time. The ability is intrinsic, built into his nature from creation, and it functions as movement through a dimension Sonic's speed cannot access. Sonic is fast in space. Mephiles is unimpeded in time, and if the destination is 5 seconds in the future, stepping there directly is not slower than running there, even if the mechanism is entirely different. His intangibility removes the physical friction that limits every other runner in this video. Walls, obstacles, other characters, the ground itself, none of it constrains a being that can simply pass through all of it. Mephiles doesn't race Sonic, he just arrives at the finish before the race is announced, having folded himself there through a temporal shortcut that Sonic's speed cannot intercept because Sonic's speed is bound to a single temporal direction. The case against counting Mephiles is equally real and equally worth holding. Time travel is not speed, and intangibility is a defensive property, not a movement property. Both are useful for avoiding Sonic, but neither demonstrates that Mephiles could outrun Sonic on a flat track with no obstacles and no tricks under the same conditions that define every other comparison in this video. The evidence that supports the objection is substantial. Mephiles never wins a race in any game he appears in. He wins fights through possession, surprise, and temporal ambush, all of which are abilities that bypass the question of speed entirely rather than answering it. He was built to show up somewhere Sonic cannot reach, which is a different claim entirely from being able to outrun Sonic when both are moving in the same direction through the same space at the same time. The character who was accidentally created from a failed god project and ended up as a minor antagonist in a 2024 spin-off was not built to compete with Sonic on a track. He was built to appear beside Sonic before Sonic has left the starting line, and there is a meaningful difference between winning a race and refusing to participate in one. The resonant image to hold is Mephiles in Shadow Generations, a shadow cast by a sun that was supposed to have been erased, still flickering across a decade that should have extinguished it. A being made of failed science and accidental creation who can step through time and space at will, who, when measured honestly against the actual question of speed, was never competing in the same contest Sonic was running, and whose presence in this list is valid only if the definition of faster stretches far enough to include arriving before the race has begun.